And hey, everybody. I think we are live. Um, if you would, just somebody tell me if you cannot hear me, or actually, if you can hear me. If you just put in the comments, that would be fabulous. That way I can know that everybody can hear me. Uh, Thank you, everyone. We're going to give it just a minute for some more people to get in on the fun. But as we get started, um, know that this is We the Patriots USA. You can find us at wethepatriotsusa.org. And please go there and sign up to be able to continue uh, the getting good information. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Constitution. We're going to talk about all of or not all, but we're going to start with a breakdown of the Constitution. We're going to talk about some real basics, and then we're gonna get into some other things that are of interest, of late interest. In fact, it just came out Friday. Supreme Court case. Um, be a little bit of an interesting discussion. So please feel free to join in on the discussion. As always, we the Patriots USA are a 501c3 or 4. We are not political in the sense that although each and every one of us have a political ideology, we are trying to keep this outside of the thank you guys for letting me know you can hear me. We're trying to keep this outside of, left versus right, that kind of a thing. We're trying to talk about the Constitution here because aren't we all Americans together first? I think we are, and I am sure you agree. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And so, keeping it to what the Constitution actually says, and the things that where we get to a good understanding of the Constitution is what we're all about. And so, let's dive right in. So, last week, if you were able to join us, thank you. It was a lot of fun. Brian and I had a lot of fun with all of our discussions, and it was wide ranging. As always, tends to ramble a bit. We're going to try to make this go a little bit quicker, shorten it up a bit so that we don't keep you on all night. Know that this is completely live. Last time we had to do a recording and then play it because Brian cannot join us here in the evenings generally. He will probably be listening in, and he may join us from time to time, at least via audio. But if you will post your comments into whatever you are utilizing to watch us, whatever platform, we are supposed to be able to see those comments here. If we do not, and I do not address them, please let me know afterwards. We are going to try to go through and check out the comments. This week should be a lot better than last week. Last week was just swamped. And so we should do a better job of getting to all the comments. So if you put in your comments, then we will address them as we go. I love interaction. I think it actually makes things better. And if I lose you at any time, do not hesitate to put in a question because I guarantee you, if I lost one, I've lost more, and I can do that from time to time. I try to keep it as clear and concise as possible, but I have my moments. All right. With that said, We the Patriots USA, as always, is a 501c3. We are a public interest law firm giving pro bono legal work that has a broader effect than the case that we're working. And so, if you need help, this is a place to come. We are always needing funds to be able to do the work that we do. Brian is an attorney, and he has networked with attorneys around the country. I am not an attorney. I am just a regular American who one day realized that I needed to learn the Constitution because, by God, it was the only way that I was going to know how to actually uphold the law. I was like everybody else, frustrated beyond words that that the law just never was seemed to be actually upheld. And so I started studying the Constitution, and I have I've spoken pretty bluntly and plainly about what it says and what it does not say, and in so doing, have made a bit of a name for myself. And so here I am. Uh, but know that this has a lot of years of work going into it, um, and it comes from reading the original documents. I encourage everybody, go to my website, constitutionalgrounds.com. On the front page, you will find the Constitution. You can read it for yourself. Most people don't know what it says. And tonight we're going to give an overview and some of the real basics that get us to where we're get us to the Constitution. So, in order to understand just what our founders meant, we have to understand a few concepts that lead up to it, and so that's where we're going. So, with that being said, the first thing that I would like to do, and I'm going to figure out how to do this because I haven't worked the software enough. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. Um, and and um, allow you to see my screen so that I can so that oops, get to the right one. There we go. Here's constitutionalgrounds.com. And so hopefully you can see this on your screen. And you go to constitutionalgrounds.com. And like I said, the first thing that you find is the Constitution itself. And so at the top, we put up a table of contents with links, and you can go right to whatever place in the Constitution that you want to find. The other thing that you can do is you can hit Control F on your Windows machine. You can go to Find in Page on an Android device. Apple, it's the little cloverleaf symbol and then F. I don't know how to do it on an iPhone. But if you go to those, if you do these things, you can then find a word. So let's say you wanted to find taxation, or you wanted to find some word, vote, or whatever. You can just find it. It just finds it. This is a single page, the entire Constitution, and these links just take you to different sections of the Constitution. So, that said, let's take a look at the Constitution itself and start just by glancing here at the table of contents. Try to get it to all appear there. So this is the entire Constitution and table of contents. Note that we have a preamble at the top. We have Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3. Those are the divisions, if you will, the various branches of the federal government. We'll look at them more in detail a bit later. And then Article 4 deals with the states. The states have to be addressed because we have governments, not just the federal government. We were not, our founders decided we were not going to be an all in one government like you see a lot of countries. They're just a single government, the entire country. But we were going to actually be a compendium of individual nation states. And those individual nation states would come together under compact this Constitution, and they would agree to delegate certain powers off to the federal government, and other powers would be retained by the states or the people, and those powers would need to be outlined. And so that's what we have with this Constitution. We have the delegation, the first three branches. What's the federal government going to do? And then the fourth, Article 4, we have what are some of the responsibilities to the states? What can the states do and not do? And some protections for the people against the states. So in other words, every state under Article 4 is to treat everybody alike. And no state is immune to this because, as Article 6 says down here, the U.S. Constitution is supreme, even over state constitutions. Because of that, even though the states individually compact to the federal government, all of the states agree that the U.S. Constitution is supreme, and then in its realm of its area of delegation, it is to be the binding document where states have power. Their constitution and laws would be binding, but there are some things in the U.S. Constitution that are binding overall. And those come down to individual rights, because we, the people, are supreme. We'll take a look at a few of those things here in just a bit. In Article 4 as well, we see, along with the preamble, we see a social compact that is acknowledged and in large part codified. Most of it remains unstated, uncodified, but it's there if you're willing to see it. We're going to talk about social compact here in a little bit, but the social compact is vital, and it's something that I was never taught, and or what little bits of it I was taught, I was always taught wrong. And this goes back to when I was a Cub Scout and I was learning about some civics and things like that for some of our badges and things like that we were working on. And I was taught that we were a democracy, and we're not actually in the full sense of the word. We are certainly not a pure democracy. We are a democracy in one sense, not the sense I was taught. We are a democracy because it means the demos, the people, rule. And so in that sense, we're a democracy, but we are not a pure democracy because we are actually to be a constitutional republic. And this is a limitation on a democracy that we put on ourselves. And it comes down to several things, but one of the biggest things is that we treat each other equally. We treat each other alike, like we are to be treated. Kind of sounds somewhat like what the Bible might have to say, that do unto others, and that whole line. Yes, actually it is. And it's actually codified into our Constitution in large part. We'll see that in a minute. Article 5. Article 5 is a unique section that talks all about how to change this Constitution. And there are a couple of different ways that Article 5 lays out. We're not going to get into all of that tonight, but Article 5 is very important because we've got to be able to change things when things aren't quite right. And as you can see, over 200 plus years, we now have 27 amendments. 27 times we've changed the Constitution, and that's the amendments. Now, of course, we all have probably heard of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments. They're not the only amendments that were actually initially introduced by James Madison, who introduced the Bill of Rights. But rather, he introduced several more that never made it out to the states. So he introduced everything to Congress. We go back to Article 5, and Article 5 says that Congress may introduce by resolution a an amendment to the states to be ratified. Then, when 3/4 of the states ratify the constitutional amendment, then it becomes part of the Constitution. And at that point, the other states also accept that it has been ratified. Uh, and so when it started out, James Madison introduced 12 or 13 different amendments. He actually only had 12 that were discussed in Congress. And then what happened is only the first 10 were immediately ratified by the states. And then we have the 27th Amendment, is one of those other amendments. It's the longest standing, longest running amendment to be ratified. And many of the other amendments, if you read through the amendments, many of them have sunset dates that if it's not passed within 7 years, it's null and void. Well, they must have made it because they passed. Some people talk about the Equal Rights Amendment, came up in the 1970s, and it had a sunset date, and it didn't pass within the sunset time, so it stops being a potential amendment unless it goes back through the Article 5 methods of being reintroduced to the states. So we have a lot of things that actually this Constitution does, and rather than get into all the nitty gritty, what I want to do is I want to talk for a few minutes about some real basic introductory kind of discussion. So let's start. Let me check my messages. I don't have anything yet. So let's start with Article 4, because I mentioned a minute ago the social compact. And the social compact is one wherein we may see how not only the protections for us against an overreaching government, a government that could go tyrannical, but rather we see actually how we're supposed to treat one another. And let's go back even before the Constitution ever came up. Our founders were really, really fans of what was called Enlightenment philosophy at the time. And perhaps the most important person in US, American Enlightenment philosophy was a man named John Locke. John Locke served as a doctor to a lord who received a warrant from the crown to come over and and to the Americas, to the Carolinas, and actually administer the Carolinas in the name of the king. And so what happened was he came over to the Americas, partly because he needed to get out of England. Locke had written a a piece called the his treatise, um, his two treatises, or it was actually his two treatises. One was a denunciation of what came to be known as um, divine right of kings, and specifically a gentleman named Robert Fulmer, who wrote that kings are really in the Adamic line from Adam. They're all a father to all the rest of us, even if they were younger, whatever. He was trying to make up some sort of line that doesn't exist, and this was uh, Locke's intent was to show that this guy's just making all this stuff up and it doesn't exist. And then in his second treatise, which dealt with the purpose and extent of government, and that in which he talks about how all are free by nature. If we were alone on the earth, we would have utter freedom, no limits whatsoever, except nature and what God puts into nature that would limit us. So only our potentially our good sense, if you will, and nature itself would limit us for whatever we wanted to do. And then he goes on and he talks about how when we introduce other people, though, we then have a conundrum, because now we have all of these free people who now have rights that collide when they come into contact with one another, and you cannot do just whatever you want. Benjamin Franklin famously said that my right to swing my fist ends at the tip of your nose. And so he described what Thomas Jefferson said in a little lengthier um, treatise or phrase. He said that now it's just gone out of my head. Anyway, Thomas Jefferson mentioned a similar thing, that our rights are completely we're completely free, but we are limited by the equal rights of others. And so when equal rights collide, there we can have a government who can order things so that we don't have collisions. Think like the basic rules of the road. We have a standards group called the legislature that decides, oh, we're going to drive on the right. If we were in England, they decided they're going to drive on the left. But if everybody does that, everybody can go about freely exercising their rights and never colliding with one another. It's only when people screw up and don't follow the rules, all the different rules that it takes to keep collisions from happening, then is when collisions happen. And the purpose, Locke says, for the for government is basically to enhance our freedoms, to provide safety, and allow us to come together into society for the mutual benefit of everybody. Because what I do for a living really kind of requires that I have a city nearby. I'm either near a city or in a city, because what I do requires a lot of people around to get work. If I'm out 100 miles from nowhere, I can't earn a living. I'd have to do something different. I'd have to do whatever you can do 100 miles from nowhere. So for me, I need the city for my work. Well, that's mutual benefit, because I'm benefiting somebody else. They pay me, that benefits me. It's win-win. There are rules that are involved in all of this to make sure that we all do our things correctly, and therefore we have more rules when we come into a city than we would if we were out in the country all by ourselves because there's nobody around to harm. And so there by nature doesn't need to be as many rules. Well, and if you don't like freedom and you don't like the rules that are in accord with freedom, then Locke says the answer is that you can move away to some place that's more to your liking. And we see this a lot now. People are finally recovering this thought process. And we've seen some very famous people who decided that that America wasn't for them anymore, and they have left the country. They don't like the current president, or they don't like something that's going on. Whatever the reason, they have chosen to up and move, and it is their right. Now, Locke went on and went one step further, and this was something that was news to me and really made me think for a bit. And he said that upon the age of majority, or becoming an adult, he said that upon that age, by choosing to remain, you choose you consciously make your choice about the law you are subject to. And so by remaining here as an adult in the United States, we are subject to American law. Now that said, there's laws that are on the books that are constitutional. Those would be law. And then there's laws on the books that are unconstitutional, and those are, by definition, not law. So legal and illegal laws. It's a concept that not everybody quite grasps or wants to grasp, because now we have to decide, is a law constitutional or not? And we have a lot of people telling, Supreme Court and others saying that laws are constitutional that are absolutely not constitutional. We have a history of this going back 200 years. So we have to decide, is it constitutional or not? But really, it comes down to our social compact. Are we going to treat one another equally? Let's look at a couple of things. It says here in Article 4, Section 2, that the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. This is an artful way of saying we all have the same rights. Everybody all across the country, no matter what, states, this, you're subject to this. Now, this is not allowing states to make up rights that don't exist, but it's saying that citizens in each state shall be entitled to the privileges and immunities as free citizens are, is a way you could read this. So why? Because we, the people, are free by nature. It's how we created this government. It says in Section 4 of Article 4, it says that the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. Now, a republican form of government is unique. Madison wrote about this in the Federalist Papers and talked about all how you can judge a Federalist or a Republican nation. He said if you look at by how everybody calls themselves, it seems like everybody and their brothers a Republican. But then he goes on to describe that no, a Republican form of government requires that a free people creates the government, and that free people remaining free under their own rules, hires a government, and that government is limited by the compact, this Constitution. Okay. And so this Constitution is the limit that we grant to government. Now, the argument against a Bill of Rights and literally a group of people called the Federalists, or came to be called the Federalists, argued that this clause in Section 2 of Article 4 is all you need to protect every natural right of all free people. Okay? That was their argument. Why? Because under a Republican form of government, under a constitutional form of government, free people take from their rights and or rightful powers and grant to the government those powers. Okay? They can always be recalled, but we grant to the government these rightful powers and no other. I like to phrase it in a way like with contracting, because the Constitution is a contract, a compact between ourselves, between the states, and between the states and the federal government. It's saying that here is a scope of work, and this is what you are to do. Remember, we go back to the this, back to the table of contents. Article 1 has this scope of work that you're to do. This group is to do. Article 2 is a different group, a different branch, and they're to do these things. And Article 3 is a different branch, and they're to do those things. So Article 1, legislature. Article 2, the executive branch. Article 3, the judiciary. They're to do those things and nothing else. Now, let me ask you this. If any of you are a contractor and you go out and do work that is outside of your scope, can you expect to get paid for it? Can the person you contracted with, could they fire you for stepping outside of the scope of work and doing work they did not contract you to do? Oh, absolutely. You cannot expect payment for it. You cannot expect that the contracting party, we the people, would accept your work and allow it. No, that was anathema. The founders thought, no, in a Republican constitutional form of government, absolutely not, cannot happen. So there we have it. And then there's an argument about federalism and the difference that we're not a fully Republican form of government. We have federalism going on. And Madison in Federalist 39 talks about this if you want to delve into all of this a little bit more. But this is the basic Constitution. This is what we have. And a little bit about how we got here. Now let's remember. Let me go back and in my share. Let's understand for just a few minutes. I've got a question. Let's take up this question. What are those immunities referred to in Article 4, Section 2? Excellent question, because I didn't cover that. So the privileges would be everything attending freedom. The immunities are any penalties for exercising your privilege when you have not harmed another. So if you are not violating somebody else's rights, you have the absolute right to exercise whatever freedom that is. And so it's why we can know so many things our government does are actually illegal because they actually operate in 180 degrees off from that. Instead of working that we're all free unless and until you do something wrong, and then we have a court process created in the Bill of Rights whereby people can bring complaints, either criminal or civil, and there is a process to protect our freedoms, to protect our rights. I'll deal with that in a second, Alex. Um, uh, the we will we we have a process that is set up by basically the Fourth through the Eighth Amendments in the Bill of Rights, and that is a mechanical process. Those are what are known as civil rights, or what our founders called civil rights. So this goes back to understanding terminology of really foundational things. There's natural rights. Those are all rights that attend being a free person. Now, in the United States, you are born such a free person. In the United Kingdom, you are not. There is no one in the United Kingdom born a free person. They are all what? They are all subjects of the king. Okay? They are subjects. There is a measure of freedom that attends them, and when they have a thing, a position called a freedman or a freeman or something like that, it's not an American definition of free. Ours is a naturally free. So a naturally free person has no one else on earth who can tell them what to do. They only have their own words and good sense to say, hey, I need to modify my behavior a bit because I'm going to voluntarily, uh, yes, good point. I'll get to that. The 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 other the a free person in another country is not a naturally free person because they are still a subject of a higher being. No, I don't mean like a higher being. I mean an order higher than them, but yet just another human being. So the only person born free in England is the king or queen themselves. And they're not really born free because there's a king above them and they are subject to the king or queen until they get to be king or queen. In America, it's different. If you are born here, you are born free. And that is naturally free. And that is a concept that is found nowhere else in the world, anywhere. Maybe a couple of places have tried to kind of emulate that, but that's what our founders gave us. We are born free, but then because, like what Locke said, we have the equal rights of others, we have to figure out how to deal with all of that and come together in society. We voluntarily give up some of our powers so that society and have society take care of those things so we don't have chaos. We see this a lot in our Declaration of Independence. It mentions that when the king pulled or closed legislatures, because that was King George III, he closed down some of the legislatures, New York, Massachusetts, closed them down. Well, what they said was that the powers don't go away, but those powers not being exercised by a judicious and less emotional body are returned to the people for their exercise. And basically, what ends up happening is everybody does whatever they want with those powers, and you can actually see all sorts of chaos break out. And this was the warning of our founders, that this was what the king was doing to us, and we needed to bring that to an end. And in reality, we never had such an agreement with the king that he could close down our legislatures and he could do all of those things. These colonies were founded on completely different terms. The king started imposing these terms on us, and that's why we fought a war. Well, we had a good point um, to what we were talking about with the with rights and privileges and immunities, and and I would say in answer to this, Alec, that traffic infractions can be a crime. And it's not so much a crime. It could be a civil infraction, which usually traffic infractions are. But there are victims. The other day, there was a guy who was weaving through traffic, and I will tell you, he was a menace to everyone on the society. We all got through it, but that does not mean he was not in violation of everyone else's rights on that road. Okay, and there were a time or two he came pretty close to hitting the center divider and cracking up, and then he could have really done something. And it was all because he wanted to go 100 miles an hour. And so he was weaving through and everything. It was ridiculous. He was going 30 or 40 miles an hour faster than everybody else on the road. And it was slowing traffic. It was congested traffic. And so there is a time and a place that sort of thing can happen. But remember, I told you that they work on everything kind of back way round. Well, think about your driver's license for just a moment, and think about that driver's license. That driver's license. Uh, let's go to the fifth. Or Alec also says that subject is also mentioned in the 14th Amendment. Let's go to the 14th Amendment here for just a second, because the 14th Amendment is fascinating to look at, because of how it is phrased. Let's just do the entire screen and go to the Constitution. Let's go to let's start with the Fifth Amendment. We're going to see it parallels. The Fifth Amendment says that no person shall be, it says at the very beginning of, it says, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay? So you cannot be deprived of your rights, of your liberty, without due process of law. And this whole process, remember I talked about the Fourth Amendment all the way through the Eighth Amendment. This is the mechanical process by which we are adjudged to lose a freedom, a natural right. And then they come down, and we go down to the 14th Amendment, and we see that anybody born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, in other words, we've agreed we're going to be Americans. We are now subject to the laws that we, the people, have allowed to be created. They are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. And then it goes on and says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. This goes right back to the Article 4 we were just talking. No state shall make or enforce any such law that shall abridge the privileges or immunities, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So, in other words, without the court process, you can't lose any of those rights because they exist, they're natural. That's what they were saying. And so, what about when we, um, what about when we have our driver's license or they create any sort of a government license? They're working this exactly the opposite way around. They're saying due process is legislation. And by legislation, we can prohibit everybody, but then grant you back your right under this licensing scheme. Okay. And so what's happened is everything's flipped around. You can't do it unless we say you can, then we make you jump through the hoops or whatever it is they do for the licensing scheme. And then where's your due process of law when you're caught exercising a privilege, a natural privilege, without your little permission slip? And and they would then take you to due process and say that the due process um, is, hey, we told you you had to have a license. Now, is that what the Constitution allows the government to do? My argument is absolutely not. It's 180 degrees off of the direction the Constitution allows the government to go. It's currently the scheme under which everybody operates, and I don't suggest that you put yourself in harm or in way of danger by not going along with the system to the degree that makes you comfortable. But the point is, we have a lot of work to do to reform our governments and get them back into proper order. And I will tell you, as one who has talked to a bunch of people sitting on these licensing boards, not one of them was ever concerned with due process. Rather, they said we have to have this licensing process so that we can more readily deal with infractions. Because if it comes down to us having to go to court for every last thing, then nothing would ever be enforced. And so we have to just be able to threaten that you know that we're going to pull your license unless you make good on XYZ or do a thing the way they say to do them or whatever. And so, no, not everything works according to Hoyle. Now, interesting how the this question: how are rights impacted by property taxes? Well, taxes can be applied to a lot of different things. And property taxes go back centuries. So property taxes are not new, but I would beg you to look at your property taxes and determine whether or not what those taxes are spent on are actually legitimate. Is the spending the government is doing actually legitimate? Now, let's go back to the Fifth Amendment here for a second. And let's share my screen again. And let's go back. Um, let's go back here and look at the Fifth Amendment one more time. The Fifth Amendment actually gives us a a concept, a way that we can judge um, how money is being spent by government and whether government is actually rightly spending money or not. And it says that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. Now, there are a lot of people that will argue, and I've fought this for years, that property only means your house or your car, big stuff. But in reality, our founders meant property meant everything. You, yourself, your time, everything you possess, your money, um, your house, your land, your car, your horse, whatever it was, it's all property. All of you has properties. You know, you have your thoughts, you have your abilities, you have your natural gifts. Those are all properties that make you uniquely you. Um, and so, what is the concept? The concept is your property cannot be taken without just compensation being given you for that property. So, that being said, um, when you look at government spending, a lot of government spending is being spent, and you're not getting a dime of compensation for what they're taking. So the taxation is being taken, and they're demanding the taxation, but they're doing things that the Constitution, doesn't allow government to do. One of the big things, especially at the federal level, is that the if you just keep it in mind, keep this thought process in mind. Charity is nowhere given to government, and if you stop and reason it out, it can't be. Why? Because if the government demands all of us pay for whatever Congress or the state legislature thinks is necessary, because whatever the thing is, the poor people or housing or whatever. Or maybe instead of just the poor, maybe it's the rich, and they want to force an investment into something they want, like giving rebates or incentives to buy a particular kind of vehicle, or to get particular kinds of appliances in your house, or subsidize whole industries because they think it's going to be better in the long run. Rather than having those industries go out and get investors, the government just comes along and taxes all of us and then gives the money away. But where's our just compensation for what they take? And if that cannot be a direct one-to-one just compensation you're getting for what you got, then, or what you've given, you're getting for what you are giving, what they're forcing us to give often, then such tax can be deemed unconstitutional. Unfortunately, no one in government wants to admit that. No one in any of the branches. And so there we have it. We have uh, we have a proper way to tax, and I think a lot of people who are against property taxation have a very good point. And Alex actually addresses it here. Let's put this up. He says, but if we have the right to own property, and if rights cannot be taxed, because that would downgrade them to a mere privilege, then I would say that would downgrade them even further than that, a privilege uh, of tyrants, then upon which basis is there power to tax property? And good question. Because remember, privileges are rights. They're ours naturally. So let's not let the people who have tried to conflate these terms. Our privilege is natural rights, and that's what the founders meant by it. When they when anybody wants to argue the exact opposite, that a privilege is a grant, then we're not acting as equals anymore. Somebody is the grant giver, and all of the rest are subjects. And that's unequal. We all must always remain equal. Otherwise, we don't have a Republican form of government. It always requires that we're always equal. Sure, the government makes the rules, the regulations. Remember, that's like the rules of the road, the driving on the right or the left, stopping at the stop signs and the stoplights, giving way to the right, those kinds of rules. It's not you may drive, you may not. Those are now we've set up an unequal distribution. Everybody may drive, but everybody is required to know and operate according to the rules of the road. Why? So that it keeps everybody else safe. Those who infringe those things put other people in danger, and they then can be punished. Well, what about taxation? Well, if taxation is lawful, what does the government have if people to use to actually collect if people act improperly, like those who would infringe our rights willfully? I mean, there are criminals out there. How do they go about collecting when people don't actually abide by the compact themselves and give what they owe? Because remember, they owe the rightful tax. We do not owe wrongful taxes. We owe rightful taxes, and those rightful taxes we have to go ahead and pay. But what kind of leverage does the government have if somebody doesn't want to do that? That's open for debate. Property taxes were one such thing. Now, again, I beg you to look at your property tax bill. Your property tax bill would be a fraction of what it is today if we had lawful taxation. A fraction. In fact, I'd like to point this out because two of my local congressmen pointed it out to me. I didn't even know it happened until it was pointed out to me by them. And that was in the year 2024, 100% of all monies collected at the federal level were uh, were collected and paid only the mandatory spending portion of the federal government. Now, the mandatory spending is Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, um, a bunch of welfare programs, and the VA. That's it. That's it. And the VA is a very small portion of it. All of the rest, and there might be a couple of other smaller things in there that I've missed, and don't hold me to that. But it's basically those things. That was over $4 trillion, and it went to pay all of those things. And I will show you in the weeks to come where none of those things but the VA are actually lawful. And then when we go and we look at how much the lawful portion of the mandatory spending was, and we go down to discretionary, you will see that more more illegal spending takes place, and that illegal spending equals more than what was collected. So the mandatory spending, uh, all monies collected at the federal level in 2024 went to illegal government spending at the federal level. And that came from congressmen sitting in Congress today. That's not my rule, not my I wasn't the one who found it, but I've looked it up, verified everything they said. They're absolutely correct. They don't phrase it quite like I do, but that's exactly what it is. They said mandatory spending. I said it's all illegal. They agree with me, but they try to avoid that because they have too many constituents that want all these programs. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have programs like that. They shouldn't be run by government. Now, the same thing happens at the state level, and it's nearly the same kind of thing. 2/3 to 3/4 of the spending is actually unconstitutional. Returns not one thin dime to you for the money that you took. When you think about police, fire, um, uh, courts, things of that nature, you have access to all of those at all times. You pay in so that we have all of those things. But then what happens is we have a society that is then protected in a way from chaos so that the society can grow up and be beneficial to everybody. And it is much cheaper to pay for a court system and the police and fire, those kinds of things, than it is all the chaos. And every so often you lose everything because some criminal comes in and wants to take all your stuff and maybe take your life in the process. It's a lot cheaper than that. Well, those people have to get paid. Generally, that's where that comes out of your property taxes, or it comes out of sales taxes, can come out of different things. The problem is they get into a bunch of other things. And in my state, it's about 3/4 returns me not one thin dime on my property taxes. And so I would argue I would gladly pay the lawful taxation. The only reason I pay the unlawful taxation is because they're holding my property above my head and I don't have a way out. And this leads us to the kind of the point of everything we've been building to. Is this is not supposed to happen. We are supposed to have government looking out for us, and we're supposed to have 3 branches in the federal government. We have the states, and the states are closer to the people, and then the states are broken down to 3 branches, sometimes 4, if you include kind of the agencies. States get a bit wonky about that sort of stuff, but you have branches within the states, and then you have the municipalities and so forth. But everybody's supposed to be working kind of in harmony, but at odds with one another. And so the harmony is there, that they're supposed to be all working for us and making sure that things are done right so that we get what we contracted for. And then um, and then everything should be cheap, should be safe, should be helpful to everybody. And then we, as free people, can actually build up and support all the areas that that need to be dealt with. And we, as free people, can jump in and find a need and fill it, make a profit, help people, get donations to help people, and do whatever is necessary. And we can turn this on a dime. And if something isn't needed anymore, somebody does something wrong, we can just pull our funds. We can go do something else instead. And and everything works like it's supposed to. But when government gets involved, how do you go to government to get government to back off if they're all in league with one another, right? And that's kind of where we've gotten. You can go to YouTube. You can find there's a guy from Rhode Island, a judge, who talks about he puts himself out there, and you can go and watch him deal with people who come before his either traffic or small claims or small infraction court kind of a thing. And one of the things that and I've heard it from a lot of different judges, is if they get a traffic infraction, even if they let you off, even if they determine you didn't do it or whatever, they're always trying to get something for the government. And they're like, I kind of have to get something out of you for all of this. It's like, I didn't do anything. But they're always trying to do that. And it's like this other branch, the executive branch, the police, pulled me over and gave me a ticket. I came in to you to seek justice because I think they're wrong. You need to let me off. And I mean completely, not off saying I didn't do it, but I have to pay. And there we have this blurring where branches are sometimes willing to do the right thing and push back and say, no, you can't do that. And then other times you've got them where they're working hand in glove, and it seems almost like it's conspiracy. How can I get justice? And especially if government is acting in a space you want to act. The famous thing right here in Tulsa, where we have the government who owns a big um, parking garage, and people can park there. They can park out in the open air in lower dollar parking, long term parking. But we have a private garage that'll bring your car in, drive you over to the airport because they're just off the airport grounds, just barely part of it, but a little further away. They'll drive you up in a van, pick you up, take you back. They'll for a little larger payment fee. They'll actually detail your car, wash your car, things like that. And so you'll come back, you'll have a nice new car. If you go to the government garage, it'll be all dusty. The But here's the problem: the government will subsidize with tax money and drive the price down so that the um, the uh, private party can't make a profit and hope to be close. So he's only catering to the richest, or he is having to do something to provide a service in order to be able to get something that would actually make enough money to survive. So he was complaining about that. There was no remedy. He just has to try to find a niche, and ultimately he ends up having to has to fund um, the the whole thing, and by basically getting rich people to pay him to detail the cars. If the government was out of the parking, he could do all the parking. Somebody else could do the parking. The parking would find a natural equilibrium. Everybody would make money. You could have your niche side things. There would be more options than there are now if the government was out. That would be his argument. And he's absolutely right. But can he find any satisfaction by saying, look, these people who are subsidizing with taxed money um, uh, make it impossible for the rest of us? That's not doing business. That's extorting a subsidy. And the court basically ignored him and told him to go pound sand. So there's another good question. I'll have to give me a minute. We'll read about that. So the states and the federal government have their branches, and those branches are actually supposed to be working. At times it cross purposes, only when the government is actually doing something wrong. So if one of the branches is doing something wrong, the other branches are supposed to be stepping up and saying, no, you're not supposed to do that. So if the legislature passes a bad bill, the president's supposed to veto it, tell them that what they want is unconstitutional, and send it back to Congress for them to make it constitutional. Usually they just override the veto or start again next year, but they might override the veto, and now you have an unconstitutional law on the books. Now comes the judicial branch. The judicial branch is to not uphold anything unconstitutional because they're subject to the Constitution. It says in Article 6. So if they're supposed to be subject to the Constitution, they can't abide by an unconstitutional law. And thereby we have um, seen some places where judges have done just that. Now, my argument is a little bit further. That is that no employee in the executive branch should either be upholding or trying to enforce unconstitutional laws. Okay, so we're all supposed to have an idea of what the Constitution says, and we're supposed to be thinking about these things. And so when you hear papers, please, and so forth, if licensing is not constitutional, then are police supposed to be asking for it? And we need to bring the discussion into that realm. Should the police be enforcing this, let alone the judiciary allowing it? Should the police be enforcing it? Should the DAs be taking what enforcement efforts the police part of the executive branch does, and the DAs then go out and prosecute as though this is a legitimate infraction because somebody's driving without their license or whatever. Um, uh, is that legitimate? Now, we're not talking about when people have rightly lost their right to drive because they have been a menace on the road to others, um, drunk driving, danger to others, manslaughter because their reckless driving caused somebody else's death or whatever. There is a point in time that society needs to say, "You no more." Sadly, you have worn out your welcome in this area. You can remain a member of society, but not for this. That would be upon Congress to decide those limits, but for them, not for the free people who are supposed to still be free. And so anyway, there's a a there's supposed to be this friction. And I've been hinting around um at a and Alec, I'm gonna have to get your other question here in a little bit because I'm gonna have to read it and try to understand, and that'll take me a second. I want to go on with what I was gonna talk about, and that is that I wanna I want to talk about the um, what happened on Friday. So what happened on Friday was the Supreme Court had heard a case that ultimately became known as Learning Resources Inc. et al. Versus Trump and as president of the United States. And basically what this was a claim by the petitioners that that President Trump had utilized it was improperly utilizing uh, a law that is on the books, and that is the IEPA, or the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And they and the argument basically was that this particular law does not allow for a delegation of constitutional powers from Congress to the president. Now, there is a big argument that no power can actually be delegated from one branch to another. In the mind of our founders, that was anathema. It was so nonsensical that there would be a delegation from one branch to another that they actually rejected James Madison when he, in his original Bill of Rights, included a line that said that each branch would not exercise the powers granted to the other branches. and I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it said. And they refused to send that out to the states. Congress just they were like, it's already inherent in the Constitution. You just it's nonsensical that we have to say all this stuff that is inherent. But obviously, we've lost the teaching for the last 150 years. Teachers teaching about the Constitution has gotten to such a minimal and improper level that we've lost all of these concepts that the founders figured would remain forever. Uh, Nonetheless, Congress has passed a lot. They do a lot of delegating from themselves over to other branches. For instance, virtually every law or every court rule at the federal level anyway, is created by the judiciary, and they have to have hearings on it and things like that, like you'd think an executive agency might do, all to create a rule that then is sent to Congress, and if Congress doesn't act, then it becomes de facto law. And then this compendium of judicial rules is just acknowledged by Congress as law. Congress has never debated it. Congress never took it up. Congress never took it to we the people and said, constituents, is this good with all of you? Nope, didn't happen. It all happens over the judiciary branch. And if Congress, being dysfunctional as they are, can't act on it, then it automatically becomes law. It's not an automatic veto, it's automatic approval. And we have the same nonsense here in Oklahoma. It's horrible for our various agencies. They do the same kind of thing and try to get certain things passed. And you have to make a concerted effort to get really, really bad stuff basically vetoed by the legislature. Well, this sort of thing happened. Um, Congress delegated some of their powers the to the president. And so they said, in an emergency, for the emergency, the president has certain powers. And and then there's other powers they don't mention. And the argument of the majority of the court is that the ability of the court or of the president to tariff was not included in this section of statute. Now, and they argue it from very subjective points of view. If Congress had intended tariffs, they always say tariffs overtly, and if they didn't say tariffs, then they must not mean tariffs. So therefore, President, you cannot tariff using this law. And the majority of the court basically held to that. And so that was the gist of this. It came out Friday, and I'm not going to go through. It's 170 pages long. They're not real long pages, but it's a lot of reading, and to understand everything that they're saying. What ended up happening is, in this 170 pages, there's dissenting opinion, and the three who dissented, um, uh, two of them concurred with Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Kavanaugh goes and lays out where in law the president could use to what parts of federal law the president could use to do all these tariffs that he's doing. And that very night, Friday night, the president issued a new executive order issuing the tariffs based on the other laws that Congress has delegated to him. Now, let's just also go back and look at the Constitution, and let's note that the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, let me just do it this way. Um, Now let's go back. We'll just do it this way. Article 1, Section 8 says that in clause 1 it says the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. In that is tariffing. Um, Under duties and imposts, um, uh, you would find your tariff uh, allowance. But who has the power to do that? Congress has the power to lay them, not the president. Um, the very fact that Congress writes laws allowing the president to do these things is anathema to our Constitution. It violates what's called the separation of powers. What our founding generation thought was so so instrumental, so ingrained in our Constitution that you just can't think outside of it. Um, that Congress has to lay the percentages. Congress has to lay the taxes and duties, which are then uniform across the United States, but they might lay a duty on this country or that country differently than others because of things that are going on. But there would be a debate about it, and if you go back to the case, it was a couple of businesses. This learning resources was a pair of businesses, and then there were others because there were a couple of cases that were combined for this one. That's why the et al. But the learning resources portion of this was a couple of businesses. And in the facts portion of when you read through it, the facts portion tells you that. And and so what it was these businesses, if Congress was laying the tariffs, then these businesses would have had a chance to discuss these things with their congresspeople, their senators, and maybe the tariffs wouldn't happen. Maybe the tariffs would look different. There would be a lot of factors that are involved, but it wouldn't happen on a dime and maybe affect businesses. Their argument was by tariffing the the imports that they bring in, they are thereby ultimately causing a hidden tax to learning resources, because obviously the foreign country didn't the maker didn't absorb those costs. Instead, they passed them on to learning resources. And they said that's a taxation of us, and we don't like that. Um, and so it wouldn't necessarily have happened. You wouldn't hear some of the outcry if Congress had taken it up. You probably would hear some, but it would take Congress a while to act, if they acted at all, and it might look a lot different. I don't disagree with President Trump that these these things work, and Congress has delegated these powers to him, but arguably unconstitutionally. So how do we rectify this? Well, we've got to get Congress back to being jealous for their own duties and powers and creating all the laws that are necessary for um, within their power. So if they have a power, they need to make sure that they actually set the rules and that those rules are constitutional. So there we have a separation of powers. The president can continue, according to statutes, he can continue doing kind of what he's been doing, but he's going to have to use other means to do it. The argument is it really constitutional? I think our founders would have a difference of opinion from, say, a lot of the people that are in government today. I see Brian's getting on.
Yeah, I'm just jumping on for a minute. David, great job tonight as always. I'm Brian Festa, attorney and co-founder of We the Patriots USA. I wanted to answer this question from Alec. I saw that you were addressing his earlier question
Yes.
a little while ago, but I don't know if you addressed this one about Article 3 and original jurisdiction. If you did, forgive me, but Article 3 only deals with the federal judiciary. The federal government, Congress, and the federal government have no authority. The Supreme Court has no authority over state courts. So this was only referring to federal action. So if you sue the state, for instance, or if the state brings a case against you in federal court, that the Supreme Court can have original jurisdiction. Original jurisdiction doesn't mean they have to take every case immediately. Even though it says the word shall, that simply means they can. They can hear the case from the start. In other words, not even on appeal. That's what original jurisdiction means. Usually the Supreme Court, in most cases, hears cases under its appellate jurisdiction, which means when you appeal something. But original means like when you first file it in court. You can file a complaint with the Supreme Court. The state can do that, or you can do that if you're suing the state, barring 11th Amendment immunity, which is a topic for another class.
Right. I was about to put
immunity applies in most cases, so most cases against states get thrown out. Isn't that lovely? You don't actually get to sue the state in most cases. But the reality is you would not want Article 3 to dictate that the state or that every case in a state court has to be heard in front of the Supreme Court, because number one, nothing would ever get done. But more importantly, because it'd just be too many cases, but more importantly, you don't want the federal government, any branch of the federal government, be it the courts or the executive branch or Congress, to have authority over issues that are clearly state issues and don't involve a question of federal law or the U.S. Constitution. Each state has its own constitution, as you know, which is separate and apart from the U.S. Constitution. So we don't want, although in some cases you'd want to, in your mind, you think it would be great if, because the Supreme Court's the most powerful court in the country, that you could just bring the state to court in every case in front of the Supreme Court, or every, lawsuit that you filed could be heard in front of the Supreme Court. You actually wouldn't want that, because you wouldn't want the federal government be having authority. All cases Alec is putting on, the word all applies to all federal cases. Anytime you see anything in the Constitution, it's talking about with regard to the authority of any branch of federal government. Again, be it the executive branch, the president, Congress, or the Supreme Court. Whatever it's referring to, cases or powers or executive orders, those are all federal. It's assumed. They don't put the word federal in there because it's assumed that you understand, and I'm not belittling, or please don't take offense. I'm not, and I can see why you might think that, but it's assumed when you're reading the federal Constitution that you know this applies only to federal actions, federal courts, federal matters. Because again, we have the 9th and 10th Amendment, which David has probably already touched on in the first two classes, but he might have only mentioned it in passing. But we should do a whole class on that, David.
That'll be next week.
Oh, that's next week. Okay, excellent. We're going to put that up. I'm going to make a flyer for that. Next week, we're going to talk about the 9th and 10th Amendment and why we don't want the federal government to have that kind of power, why we want the states to have power, even though we've seen the states usurp power. Now, they can't usurp power that is reserved to the people. That's the big thing. It's not even about power that's reserved to the federal government. Let's forget about that. It's the power reserved to the people that they usurped during COVID, for instance. And we don't want the state to do that, but you don't have to necessarily, not every one of those cases is a federal case. Sometimes it's enough. You can bring it in state court, and actually it's much more expeditious sometimes
Right.
than trying to bring it in federal court.
Oh, yeah.
You know the old saying, let's not make a federal case out of it. Well, there's a reason for that saying, because making a federal case out of something means that it's incredibly cumbersome and long and drawn out, and there's a lot more hurdles often that you have to jump through, hoops you have to jump through. But anyway, I will. Yeah, I see what you're saying. There's more comments and questions coming in, but I just wanted to address that one. I think it's better suited, actually. Thank you, Alec, for your questions. And David, David Scott Robinson is coming up with another one. He's just asking about Mitch Vexler of Texas. I'm not familiar with him. I don't know if you are.
No, I have not worked with him. I am not familiar with him and what he's doing.
How about just the last question? What are your feelings of how to fight against property taxes at the local and state level?
Well, I touched on that before, and that is there are several things that we need to address. First, we've got to address the spending. We have to address that the vast majority of government spending throughout every state in the union and our federal government is actually in violation of the Fifth Amendment. That concept that you have to have just compensation for money taken. And we'll have to do a longer class on that. May not be in the first 4 weeks. So, donate and let's talk about that. But it was.
I appreciate the plug.
The thing is, it's vital to understand. Maybe we'll get to it the fourth week. Thomas Jefferson penned a letter, and it was sent to the King and Lord North in 1775. That detailed that taxes were voluntary, meant to be voluntary, and the United States was giving voluntarily for anything that was truly necessary. These demands upon us was basically extortion, and we had a right to inquire about how our money was being used and whether any value was getting back to us for the money that they were demanding. We fought a revolution over this very concept, and now we are basically 2/3 to 3/4 of every government in the United States is violating this very concept. I mean, 2/3 to 3/4 of all spending in the United States at every level is this kind of spending, and our founders did it for a fraction of that and fought a revolution over it. We've just been lollygagging, letting it go. So I think that's the first thing that we have to deal with: spending. Don't look at the collection. Look at the spend. That's first. Second, then when spending is down to a reasonable level, then we can actually have a talk about what would work better. At that point, since in the States, most people or most cities operate off of sales tax. It's certainly here in Oklahoma, it's a big part of every state. You might find that no property tax is necessary. It can all be handled because the dollar amounts are so small that you can actually afford to do it at a reasonable a sales tax rate, and that would be reduced from what we are currently spending on. So there's a lot of different ways that we can attack this. I think everybody has to look to Florida, who apparently has been getting rid of property tax. I think they got rid of property tax. You look at Texas and how things have gone. They got rid of income tax, but have super high property tax rates. So we have to start looking at a lot of things and in different ways of getting rid of and allowing people to truly own their property. I am completely in agreement with that. Although as a historian, I have to say property taxes go back to way, way back. And yeah, Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry to
Go
jump
ahead.
in because
No,
I'm
no,
not going to be able to
please.
stay on too much longer, but you can continue. This is great. I mean, generally, we advertise these as 90-minute classes, and we're at the 90-minute mark, but you can go longer. You're certainly, this is your class. Obviously, you know, if people want to stay on, you can go all night if you want. But I do want to respect people's time because there are a couple of questions. Julie had an important one, of course. She wanted to know where to make a monthly donation to have access to the class. Any monthly donation of $25 or more, you get access to the class. So wethepatriotsusa.org/donate. And the great thing about that is obviously the class is a nice bonus for your membership. You get access to our newsletter and other things like that. But you know, the $25 a month, it's really to support the work, our mission, so that, you know, I can't even tell you how many people contact us every month, every year, suffering violations of their constitutional rights. They come to us
Yes.
with horrendous violations, horrendous government overreach. And really, it's only because of the donations that we receive that we're able to say, okay, yes, we'll take your case for free. We do not charge 1 penny for any of our lawsuits. So if we assign your case a lawyer, we take it into federal court, whatever the case may be, it is 100% free of charge. And that's only because we have people donating. So that's what the money's going to. You are supporting a legal fund, which at some point you may need yourself. Not that we can promise that every single case we can take, because I never want to make that claim, because some cases are just outside of our scope, outside of the available resources that we have. Because sometimes people bring cases that, you know, I would need a staff of 100 attorneys to take. You know, we just don't have.
Right.
We're not that size of a firm yet, but we want to get there. So every dollar counts. Thank you so much for your generosity. And somebody else had some questions. Our old friend Jerry had a very interesting
Oh,
question
I love
too.
this question. Yes.
How are immigration courts under executive branch? Good question, Jerry. Good question. I like it. Talk about the president's power, though, with regard to the executive power, with regard to controlling borders and the flow of immigrants in and out of the country.
Yes. So while the Congress has power to over naturalization and over migration, it is up to the executive branch to carry all of that out. The 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 Congress has granted to the president the power to determine who is welcome in the country and who is not, down to an individual basis. Because these people are guests in the country, they are not part of our legal system yet. Our legal system is for citizens, generally speaking. And so the way Congress addressed visitors into our country and those who wanted to come into the country, wanted to stay in the country, and so forth, was through through the executive branch. And in that executive branch, there are hearing officers or judges. They will call themselves judges. And these are, as far as I can tell, fully constitutional and authorized by Congress and delegated to the president to carry out congressional wishes. And Congress can narrow that on the president if they so chose. They can broaden it. What we've seen between the last couple of presidents, between Trump now and Biden a couple of years ago, was a completely different take on what the law says. And I mean, like night and day difference. And so it would be up to us to learn the statutes to find out what Congress actually allows the president to do. And then see if the president's actually doing that. But that means we have to dig into those statutes like we were. I don't know if I actually got to a statute tonight, but we actually have to dig into the statutes. And I always go to us.house. Or uscode.house.gov is my go-to for the U.S. law statutes, and that's how we can find it, because Congress put it into the executive branch. If it was a citizen or a guest violates a citizen, now we're talking about an Article 3, or at a state level, a a judicial branch in your state who would take up the violations between persons, and you would have all of that. But to determine whether somebody is an alien enemy or an alien friend, Congress has given all of that to the president and
Right.
his
Excellent.
subordinates.
Thank you so much for your answer to that question. Michael, I see your question. I do just want to address this real quickly. Alec, we take cases primarily in federal court. However, we do take state court matters in limited circumstances, such as medical kidnapping cases. So if you go to our homepage, you'll see that's one of our initiatives. You look at our legal updates. We have a horrible case in Florida right now on behalf of a little girl that was stolen by the state. Those are state court matters. Those are, family court. They've taken, CPS or DCF has taken a child out of the home. That's something we have to get involved at the state level, because it's not like she was taken by federal officers. There's no federal jurisdiction there. It's there may be a civil rights case that can be filed in federal court.
It's
but
a natural rights case. It's
right.
a definite rights case for the child,
That's
and you're
after.
taking up her bigger rights case.
Right, but in the immediate aftermath of a child being taken away, that has to be state court to return the child to the custody of the mother, since the state is the one that took the child away. But if there's a civil suit after that, yes, we would certainly very likely file a state. We might have a state and a federal case in those situations, like we do for our Connecticut religious exemption lawsuit. So they took away the religious exemption to school vaccinations in Connecticut. We filed cases both in state and federal court because there are state claims that are distinct. There are things in state law, like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, for instance, that the Connecticut's Religious Freedom Restoration Act provides relief even apart from the federal constitution and U.S. law. So sometimes we file both. The majority, though, are federal. What we don't do in state court are private contract disputes, family law cases involving things like, custody, regular custody matters between parents, or divorce, or things like that, stuff like criminal law. We don't do that. It's civil rights law, constitutional rights law, majority in federal court, but occasionally there are cases in state court. Michael had a pretty good question up here as well, David. Are not the states violating our federal rights with regard to the Second Amendment? And that's a very broad question, because absolutely they are violating. One of the things we do at We the Patriots USA, in addition to the health freedom stuff like the vaccination cases, in addition to the parental rights cases like the medical kidnapping cases, in addition to free speech cases and religious liberty cases, we take on Second Amendment cases. We have several active lawsuits, I think 3 right now, currently, between Connecticut and a couple in Connecticut, one in New Mexico, fighting against unlawful orders, either executive orders, as in the case of New Mexico, which was just a public carry ban, and then an open carry ban that was passed in Connecticut in 2023. We have a case still ongoing, a federal case against the state for that, and a postal worker case out of Connecticut as well, which there was actually an attorney who was a combat veteran, actually, was asserting his right to carry in the post office. But I mean, there's federal buildings. We can talk about that as well. But whether or not such a restriction is lawful, I mean, strict textualists, constitutionalists, Second Amendment people, like myself and like David, I think, would tell you that no, there's nothing in the Second Amendment that says there are these exceptions that certain types of federal property or certain areas you're not allowed to carry on. Now, the Supreme Court has taken a different tact on that. They've looked at historical context of, this so-called, what people on the other side of the argument say, dangerous places that are historic or historically have been areas in which the federal government has regulated. Well, I personally disagree with that, respectfully. Obviously, we have to, work within Supreme Court precedent as we're arguing these cases, but respectfully, I disagree. Just because the government's been doing something bad for a very long time doesn't make it right. Okay. If I commit the same atrocities, or if I violate the Constitution for enough decades, does that suddenly make it constitutional? No, it was unconstitutional in 1801. It's unconstitutional in 2026. And so that's just very, very clear to me. There should not be any kind of historic evaluation and looking at how the Constitution has historically been treated, how the Second Amendment has historically been treated, because they go back right to the time of the founding all the way up until now, and look at historically, has the government regulated firearms in these areas? And if so, then that makes it okay. Well, not really, because the Second Amendment, the founders, the framers of the Constitution, did not put an exception and say, well, if historically over time we regulate this, then it's allowed, then Congress can infringe on the right to keep and bear arms. They didn't say that. So the Supreme Court, by just sort of creating, that's a judicially created doctrine, I believe is an incorrect interpretation. Again, that's my personal professional opinion. And as we challenge these laws in court, we're making arguments like that. And so again, if you want to support our work, a great way to do it is either a monthly donation, which gives you access to this class, or a one-time donation at wethepatriotsusa.org. If you want to have us do a class on a particular topic, or 2 classes, that's the great thing about signing up for the class. After this 4-week trial, we have 2 more free weeks available. After the trial is over, you may be curious about a lot of other topics. David will do a whole class for you. I don't want to speak for him, but I know he will, because he's done it before. Where people have requested. I've requested. Jerry, who's a long-time class, attendee, he's requested. Over time, people come into the class and they ask questions. I'd really like to know more about this. Can you really cover this? And we could do a whole class, or 2 classes, or 3 classes on a topic and tie it into current events. And that's the great thing. You get to sort of steer the direction of the class. We don't have a set in stone curriculum where, no, on week 5, we must cover this. On week 6, we must cover that. No, it's not structured that way. Yes, are there general things that we want to touch on and David wants to cover over the course of the course? Of course. I used course 3 times in a row there. How do you like that? But, absolutely, you can make suggestions and sort of direct the flow of the class. I'm going to have to duck out right now, but did you have something to say to me before
No. I wanted to take up a little bit more about what Michael was saying, and finish what you were saying about the other classes, because there's so many more angles to go with. Thank you, Brian. Have a good night. There's so many other directions that we can go. For instance, Michael, for your question, are they violating our Second Amendment rights? I would argue, let's set the Second Amendment aside and let's focus on the fact that they're violating our Fifth and 14th Amendment rights. They're violating our Fourth Amendment rights by going after our arms in one way or another. Because aren't our arms property? If they are in the Fourth Amendment, they would be our effects. And so the right of the people to be secure in their houses, or the person's houses, papers, and effects shall not be violated except by warrant. And it goes on. But the Fifth Amendment, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So if you have not had due process, the process is laid out from the Fourth to the Eighth Amendments. You can look at it. It's clarified by your state and federal laws that are supposed to clarify all of this stuff. And your state constitution will be more specific, but generally states have a due process clause that mimics all of this, yet none of them live it out. I mean, it's amazing. And so, yes, they do. We are seeing a change. In fact, we saw a change in mindset. The current Department of Justice had written a letter to the, what was it? Was it the Bureau of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives. Um, so the ATFE, and told them that they were not allowed to any longer. I believe was it suppressors? They weren't allowed to consider accessories or suppressors, those things, under any permature requirements and so forth. And so they have basically taken all of that off the table, which is righting a wrong that has existed since 1937. And so it's still in statute, but they have told their other department that that law is unconstitutional. So here we have the executive declaring from the judicial, not the judicial, but the Department of Justice, the lawyers, telling an enforcement department that this particular law is unconstitutional, don't enforce it. So there's some move in the right direction, not nearly enough, but we'll take everything we can get as we can get it. Um, uh, and so, yeah, we need to talk a lot more about that. Yes, the Second Amendment is very clear, and no, there's no getting around it. I think when you add in the 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 Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendments, it becomes crystal clear that there is no way that your property can be so violated, or you be so violated that you possess property but you're not allowed to use it unless some tyrant gives you permission first. That is 180 degrees off of what the Constitution actually says, reads, or ever intended. Let's see what else. Are there any other good questions? Um, you mentioned, let's see. Um, you mentioned the principle, uh, or you mentioned that people born in the UK are subject to the monarch or king. I'm paraphrasing, and are not free. And the 14th Amendment states that U.S. citizens are subject of the jurisdiction of the United States. Does that make them just as unfree as people born in the UK? Or how to define subject here? Excellent question. The subject, go and read the 14th Amendment. We are subject to the laws, but the laws are not supposed to be in a tyrannical position over us. So in other words, and this is the problem, we're going to talk next week, we're going to talk about regulation versus prohibition, proper regulation versus improper regulation, things like that. Um, one of the things that happens, and it's a marker of an unconstitutional law, is that the law is, or the action by government is tyrannical. Because think about it, if we're all equal, I can't dictate to you, you can't dictate to me, we combined can dictate to no one. The only thing we can do is create rules. And we have all agreed that we will be subject to rules that we have allowed to be created. These are regulations, or things to make things regular, things that allow us to go about our business and exercise our privileges without without a concern that we would need an immunity, that we would violate and not retain immunities. So in other words, I jump in my car and we have rules for the road. I'm going to drive on the right. I can go and I can keep going. I can go as far as I want to go in the United States in my car. As long as I obey the rules of the road and I stay on the right, I can go. As soon as I move to the left-hand side of the road, now I put everybody else in danger and I'm not allowed. That's not that's not an infringement or a tyrannical rule. That is one that actually makes it so everybody can equally exercise their rights. Now, a tyrannical um, uh, rule or law or regulation or whatever you want to call it, they're pretty much synonymous. We don't use them synonymously, but they're synonymous in our founders' thought process. And that was that we get a tyrannical rule. You cannot have a suppressor. You cannot have a gun. Look at Tulsi Gabbard. She talks about how her life was threatened, and she was in Honolulu, and she was, as a veteran who has handled weapons as an active National Guardsman, was disallowed by a tyrannical police force and government in Hawaii from getting a gun permit, a permission slip to possess a piece of property and carry it around for her own protection when she had an active threat against her life, and maybe not just one. That's tyrannical. That is absolutely unconstitutional because somebody has set themselves above. If you just think equal and the rule keeps everything equal, allows everybody absolute freedom to do things within the bounds, you can do it within the bounds, then we're okay. To say, no, you can't do it within or out of bounds, or only according to bounds, certain requirements that we set. You can't possess a thing unless we say you can, or blah blah blah. That is tyrannical. Setting rules for the road, that's not. Setting, you know, some basic rules like for shooting ranges, things like that. You can go shoot your gun, but there has to be certain protections in place. Yes, berm so high and this and that and the other thing, so that nobody else is harmed. Those are legitimate. Uh, subject, we would be subject to our laws. Why? Because we had them created. The lawful ones, we're not subject to the unlawful ones. We had them created. We want them created. If we don't want them created, we need to rethink our thinking. We wanted them created so that we have a better society. We want as few as are absolutely necessary so that we don't run into having too many laws and actually be restricting people. But we do want what is necessary. We should want what is necessary, and that we are subject to by our own choice of remaining Americans. Now, that is in contrast to one who is born under a monarchical system or a other kind of dictatorial system where the tyrant at the top, you're born a subject of that tyrant, and they can be a benevolent tyrant or they can be a malevolent tyrant, but they're a tyrant. They are above you. They don't view all alike. They believe that there are some born higher than others. That's not the way our government was set up. And so those subjects remained subjects of the king if by remaining in that country. If they can get out and get over here, they disavow and they dissolve that subject relationship with the king. They're naturalized as an American. They are freeborn. They are on an equal level with that king. That they were dissolved. They had their subjection to that king dissolved. They now can look at that king on an equal footing, equally free. That's why people think we're kind of stuck up over here, because we look at ourselves as a freeborn, and they're like, nobody's freeborn. Only the king is freeborn. It's like, you got to come to America. You got to understand America. We're all born that way. Every last one of us. There's 350 million of us. Yeah, it makes for a little bit of fun and weirdness, but that's the way we are over here. That's the exciting thing. That's why I love doing these classes. All right, we've talked long enough. I hope that answers it. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, it's my pleasure to be here. I hope you'll join us for the next couple weeks. We are going to talk a big deal, Ninth and 10th Amendment, among other things, next week. Understanding them is key because it's where all of your unenumerated rights are housed, and talks about rights and powers, and we've got to understand the difference. And so we're going to get into some more history. We're going to talk about a bunch of other things next week. That's going to be a lot of fun. Liberty is always freeing and fun. And so I hope you'll join us next week. See you then.